Are your money problems turning into money fights? What do you do about that? Hi, and welcome back to Ask Dr. Saira, the show where I answer your questions about spirituality, relationships, and mental health. So today's question comes from Shabana. Shabana says, how do I deal with finances in my marriage? We have very different attitudes towards money, spending, and saving, and it's starting to turn into fights. Good question. How do I deal with finances in my marriage? We have very different attitudes towards money, spending, and saving, and it's starting to turn into fights. So that is Shabana's question. Oh, Shabana, the fights. One of the things about money is it is loaded. It's a very charged topic for a lot of people. Money can symbolize so many things. So the first thing that I would ask myself in this question is, what is it in addition to the money? Like, what else is going on here? So for some couples, for example, money could be linked to power. Maybe somebody is earning more than the other person, and so there's some sort of power difference or some sort of assumed power difference because of the way that the earning is happening. And that's something that's been there for generations. And women have only entered the workforce like less than 100 years ago, right? So there's some of that adjustment around power and what it means to be the provider. And so that's something, just a side note to keep in mind is, what are the fights also about? Like, yes, they're about money, but are they also about something else? Just kind of keeping that question in the back of your mind as you're noticing where the conflicts happen. It sounds, Shabana, like you're in what we call power struggle. So in the stages and phases of relationships, one of the natural stages that we all enter is a stage called power struggle. And that's where I want it my way, you want it your way. I want it my way, you want it your way. And there's this kind of tug of war back and forth. And like, it's fight. That's a fight, right? A fight is where there's this back and forth. Now, some people are more kind of overt in their fighting and it's very like out. And some people are much more internal with their fighting. So they do like, silent treatment or little jabs or things like that. But either case, there's fights. Power struggle happens when we don't realize we're on the same team. Okay. So power struggle happens when we think the other person is the problem, rather than realizing that the problem is the problem. So what that looks like is, right now it sounds like, you're both kind of like, there's this rope and you're both kind of pulling at it and you both want your own way. And what I would suggest is, what if you both kind of got on the same team? You both got on the same side and looked out. Our problem is there's something around money in this marriage, right? So we together are going to manage and tackle the problem of the money problems or the money fights, right? That's the problem. That is helpful, not just with money, but with so many different topics where you're seeing your partner as the problem. I would challenge you to say, how could I enlist their help, bring them on my team or join their team so that together we can solve the problem that's here? When you see your partner as the problem, there's a winner and a loser. And that sucks when you're the loser all the time, right? It also sucks when you're the winner because you realize somebody else has lost and somebody you love. And so what I would say is to reconceptualize the power struggle to let's get on the same team. So that's the first. So the first thing is, what else is going on here besides the money? The second thing is, let's get on the same team and get out of this power struggle. The third thing I want to talk to you about is something that a lot of people don't think about when it comes to these types of arguments in the home, which is your own family of origin. So one of the things I know in my marriage is that my husband and I come from very, very different mindsets around money in the families that we grew up in, right? So if you're growing up in a family like mine, where my mom, I was raised by a single mother and we were on welfare, and so our relationship to money was a particular kind of relationship. There's a lot of scarcity. There was a lot of just inaccessibility. We didn't have access to money, and when we had money, it was kind of this celebration, and we'd often spend it rather than investing it or keeping it for the future. My husband's family had a very different relationship with money. And so, he really learned things like investments and savings and long-term planning and generational wealth and things like that that I just didn't never picked up because that wasn't part of my childhood growing up. Now, just because you have money or don't have money doesn't mean, it's going to be just this or that. There's other ways of seeing money as well. I'm just giving you my example. But because we had such different ways of seeing and understanding money and spending and saving, we got into fights. And the fights were about, well, why did you have to go buy this thing? That's what the fight was. We never actually, until we realized, we never had that conversation of like, what's deeper? Like, why do I spend the way I do? Or why does he have such an aversion to spending the way he does? What's this about? And so when you look at the lessons that you got as a child and growing up in your family of origin, now you can challenge it, right? Because if something's unconscious, there's nothing you can do about it. But as soon as you bring it to awareness, now you can make some choice around that pattern that you have. So once I kind of woke up to what was happening underground, I could make some different choices, right? I didn't have to live like that hand to mouth, next paycheck to paycheck kind of mentality anymore. And so now I had to learn about other things around money that I never learned as a kid, but he did. And so now I can kind of recruit or enlist my partner to help me rather than it being a fight, right? So where there's a sharing of education, there's a sharing of knowledge that happens rather than his way or my way. So that's the second thing a third thing I would say is your family of origin. What were the stories? Was there an abundance mindset or was there a scarcity mindset? How did you see, is the universe a generous universe where you get what you ask for? Or is it a stingy universe where you have to work really hard for everything that you have? All of these beliefs will play out as in our marriage, right? Because our marriage is a time for us to kind of become better people. And this is one of the ways we do it is we look at where we're flawed and where there's gaps and we work on those. The other thing I would recommend is to not get caught up too much on the nitty-gritty details. Okay, because that's like fights happen about the nitty-gritty details and then it gets magnified to the whole thing, right? So the little nitty-gritty things that happen on the day-to-day, just be mindful that your fight's not really about that, right? Your fight's about something bigger. And so when you can take a step back and look at, okay, what are we really misaligned about? It's not about that extra pair of shoes you bought, right? It's not. It's not about that new computer that he bought. It's not. It's about something else. It's about the bigger story of we're not aligned when it comes to the way that we interact with finances. So just be mindful not to get sucked into that trap of the details and getting too fixated on the details. That said, small changes will make a big difference, right? Small changes regularly made over time can make a big, big difference. So one of the things that I had to learn how to do, because I was a spender, I spent a lot of money all the time. And one of the things that I did was I went through like a big, huge purge. I got rid of a lot of my stuff. And then I got really deliberate about what new things I would bring into the home, right? Really, really deliberate. If there's not a place for it, I can't purchase it. And if I do purchase it, I need to make a place for it, which means I have to give something away. And so I got very, very mindful about my spending and what I was spending my money on, right? What I was spending my money on and where some of it, like for me, sometimes spending was therapeutic. Shopping was therapeutic for me before like COVID and all this. I would feel good for a minute and then not again until next weekend. And so I had to do some real soul searching around, why am I spending this money? What is this really about? It's not about that sweater or those pairs of shoes, right? It's about the feeling of lack and the feeling of there's never enough. And no matter how much I have, I want more because what if tomorrow we don't have it? That was my childhood. So the little changes that I made, like one of the little changes I said was, one out, one in, like I can't buy something unless I have a place for it. The other thing was to force myself to do something called window shopping, where I would just go to a shop and tell myself I'm not going to purchase anything, just look. And if I really wanted it, I could come back next week and get it, but just look. So training myself out of that compulsive spending. You know what? Stores are really good at making us compulsively spend. Like at that final checkout, there's all of these things that you don't really need that they're like, oh, but what about this? And you might need this, and what about that? And one more thing. And right. So from a spending perspective, that's another little change that I made that I found really helpful. So whether you're the person who spends more or you're the person who doesn't spend more, whether you're the person in abundance mindset or the scarcity mindset, doesn't really matter. The point is, make small little deliberate changes. Small little deliberate changes. One of the changes my husband made was once in a while getting a coffee from outside, like not having to make coffee at home every day, but once in a while treating himself to a Starbucks, or we have this little cafe here called Steamers, having a Steamers coffee once in a while. That was a way of kind of allowing himself to spend more than maybe what was necessary, right? So these little changes have added up, and now we're much more aligned in the way that we interact with finances and the way we understand finances. And both of us have had to learn and grow and stretch. It's not like one person's right and one person's wrong, right? Both of us learning and growing and changing. So those are my thoughts of how it's worked for me and others that I've kind of coached and helped through this. Hopefully that was helpful for you. If you have a question about relationships, mental health, spirituality, please feel free to send me an email and I will answer your question in a future video. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.